This is Keys to the Shop, episode 148, exploring the ground control brewer with inventor Eli Salomon of Voga Coffee. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFiorio. I'm your host for the show. Thank you for joining me. If you have not yet subscribed to this show, I would encourage you to do so. That way you will always be updated wherever you happen to listen to podcasts, whether that's on Stitcher or Overcast or iTunes. Just hit the subscribe button. And if you love what you hear in an episode, I would also encourage you to share it with a friend. Keys to the Shop is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is a leading specialty coffee equipment supplier who curates the best equipment from around the world to fit perfectly with the needs of both their enthusiast and their professional customers. So whether you're hoping to set up a really great home bar for yourself or you have a commercial space that you want to outfit with commercial equipment, they have exactly what you're looking for at prima-coffee.com. Helping you succeed in making great coffee at home or in your shop is really what drives them. And I would encourage you to go to that website, prima-coffee.com. If you're looking for the best equipment and expert assistance to go along with it, that's the place to go. Again, prima-coffee.com. Let them know that you heard about them on the show. And thank you so much, Prima, for your support of Keys to the Shop. Now, this show is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista series line of plant-based performance beverages. They're designed specifically for professional baristas in the standards for excellence that they demand. Whether you're using their almond, soy, coconut, oat, or rice milk, their product's ability to take the heat from the steaming process, produce an unmatched silky texture, and keep the flavor balance of your beverages focused on coffee, this makes it a perfect choice for your cafe's menu. Pacific really prides itself on supporting the barista community all over the world. And these products are just a testimony to that fact. They really do help you make amazing non-dairy beverages for your customers. So go to pacificfoods.com and see how the Barista series line of plant-based performance beverages can really help elevate the non-dairy offerings in your shop. Thank you so much, Pacific, for your support of Keys to the Shop. All right, so today we're going to get a look inside of an innovative brewer called the Ground Control Cyclops brewer specifically. This is a really innovative batch brewer that brings a new level of control into the hands of the barista. And having tasted the results of just the fine tuning that you can do on this machine myself, and hearing other people describe their experiences with the ground control, I knew that it was something that I wanted to feature on the show. And so I invited the inventor of this brewer, Eli Salomon, onto the show to talk to us about this brewer. Eli is the chief executive officer and the co-founder of Voga Coffee, makers of the ground control Cyclops batch brewing system. Eli co-founded Voga Coffee in his kitchen with his friend of 20 years, Joshua Avens, Ph.D., in 2013. They were joined by Jason Sarley, associate editor of The Coffee Review, in 2014 after a blind tasting in Eli's backyard that demonstrated the dramatically superior flavor of coffee brewed on ground control. Eli first joined the coffee industry in 2006 when he founded a website out of his dorm room that sold the largest selection of espresso blends and single origins on the internet. Eli earned his MBA from the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, a JD from Harvard Law School, and an MABA in mathematics from Johns Hopkins University. In this episode, you're going to learn about Eli's unique path into the coffee industry, what inspired the invention of the ground control brewer in the first place, details of how the brewer works exactly, and, how it does what it does to get the most from your batch brewed coffee. We'll talk about the extraction science behind it, and what this brewer can do to help sustainability in the coffee industry, as well as contribute to the overall cafe experience, the way your customers experience, and you also. Eli gives us also his perspective on where the industry is heading and how the ground control is going to help push things forward. So here now is my conversation with Eli Salomon of Voga Coffee. Eli, welcome to Keys to the Shop. Glad to have you on the program today.
Thank you, Chris. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us. We're really excited to share more about ground control and what makes it so special.
Yeah, so the first time I got to see the equipment, the ground control, was at Coffee Champs in Nashville. I met you while you were showcasing it at Sump Coffee. I was very impressed, and I'm excited for the opportunity to get to know this equipment more and get to know the story behind it. So I guess that's my first question is, what's your story really? Because I know that coffee was not necessarily the first thing for you. You've done a lot of more academic things before coffee. What brought you? What's your background, and then what brought you to coffee?
My background's quite different than a lot of people in the coffee industry, and I think that's been a strong asset for me as we built out our company. My first job was an attorney. I was an attorney in Manhattan for several years, and I leveraged that background to go into the business world. I got an MBA, and after business school, I worked for a technology investor in Dallas. And that's where I helped lead a number of companies, including in the coffee brewing space. After working with that investor, I bought a one-way ticket out to the Bay Area, and my focus was data science. I led several data science teams. And in the background, my co-founders, Josh, Jason, and I were working on ground control in our spare time. So we would work nights, weekends, sometimes we would even take days off work to develop the technology, to do demos, and to get the feedback we needed to be successful. And all throughout that, my last company I founded was a pharmaceutical company. So it's a company I helped found that uses a new type of data science to discover targeted cancer therapies. So I feel like still in the drug business, caffeine is the most commonly consumed drug in the world. And it also, I believe, brings a lot of happiness to people, especially in the form of coffee.
What was the catalyst in terms of you being in terms of you getting into the tech space of developing a coffee brewer? Because there's lots of coffee brewers out there, and your choice to found a company where you're developing new technology had to be based on something that was lacking or something that you saw lacking in the current space. What was that?
Definitely. So I started my first coffee business in my law school dorm room. It was called Soho Espresso, and we had the largest selection of espresso on the web. We had over 50 different blends and single origins, all from top roasters like Klatch Roasting, Novo, Intelligentsia, etc. And this was in 2006.
Oh wow!
So when I worked for this investor in Dallas, he brought me in originally to work on a new type of wireless technology that he was bringing to market. And then one day he came to me and he said, Eli, I know you have this coffee background. You started a coffee business in your dorm room. Well, I just invested in a new type of coffee brewing technology, and I want you to help me run this company. Founder is very smart, very creative. He's an incredible inventor, but he's never run a technology business before. So he definitely could use your insights and your background. And that company ended up being a small coffee brewing single cup technology out of Bozeman, Montana, called Alpha Diminci. So my boss went to a cafe in Bozeman that was a cafe / scooter repair shop. And the owner of that cafe was tinkering around, and he had invented this new type of brewer called the steam. So I had a great experience working with Alpha Diminci, which unfortunately recently ceased operations. But I learned a lot about the coffee brewer business, and I helped lead them to market. And it ultimately won the Best New Product Award in 2012 from the Specialty Coffee Association. And right. After the launch, I decided that it wasn't really a fit for me. There were several aspects of the brewer and what it did that I thought were really different, captivating, and could form the foundation of a really interesting business. But I had very different views from the founder and the investor as to what depth of testing and R&D was necessary before launching that type of product. So we very amicably parted ways. I helped them several months after I left in a number of areas, but I decided that's not what I wanted to pursue.
Okay. And so what is it that you wanted to do?
After this investor, I moved to the Bay Area, and I really wanted to be part of the startup world. And this is what gets us into how ground control came to be. So I moved to San Francisco. I met a number of really fascinating people, and I spent months dreaming about startup ideas. It was kind of interesting. I thought I was going to start a company in the data science space. That's something I have a mathematics background as well. I have 3 mathematics degrees, and that's something that really interested me. But the more I thought about startup ideas, the more I kept going back to Alpha Dimensi. And, I thought there were some things in that brewer that were really interesting in terms of being able to consistently produce an exceptional cup and to provide that cup with a theater and to provide an experience that was dramatically elevated. And so one day, it was probably about a year and a half after I left Alpha Dimensi. So this was in probably around May of 2013. I just started thinking about what would it look like if you were able to produce a batch brewer that just produced exceptional coffee and provided a customer experience and a show that was as good, if not better, than the top single cup brewers. Because from my experience at the Steampunk, I really started to suspect that this idea that you can only produce exceptional coffee if it's brewed one cup at a time, that struck me as flawed, because the chemistry of extraction doesn't care about scale. It's really about setting up the right extraction process to create that scale. So that's really what planted the seeds of ground control. I started thinking about instead of the Steampunk, which uses steam to automate the siphon process, I started thinking about using vacuum pumps to create a large scale siphon. And that's when I called up my good friend Josh Avens. So I've known Josh for almost 20 years at this point. We met the first week of undergrad. We've been really good friends since then. I would say he's the smartest person I know. He has a PhD from Columbia University in biochemistry, and he is. This was right up his alley. So I just gave him a casual call and I said, "Hey, Josh, I had this crazy idea. What do you think about it?" And he said, "I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work. You want to try it?" I said, "Sure. Yeah. How do we do this?" And so he said, "Well, I've already bought a ticket. I'm gonna come to San Francisco." He's doing his postdoc at University of Illinois at Urbana, and he bought a ticket to San Francisco for a weekend, and we were able to prototype this idea with some glassware, some lab glassware, the top of a Yama siphon, and an air mattress vacuum pump. So we rigged it all together, and we manually brewed a cup of siphon coffee using a vacuum pump, and it tasted delicious. So I told Josh, I'm ready to start a company. This is really flavorful, really clean cup, and it works just like siphon. Now, it was kind of interesting. I was already, after that first brew, I felt we were ready to start a company. Josh looks at me and he said, "Well, you only did one extraction." I said, "Yeah, that's how you brew coffee. You add water to the grounds, wait a certain amount of time, and then you separate the brewed coffee from the grounds, in our case with a vacuum pump." And he said, people haven't done it that way in a chemistry lab in about 150 years. When we do solid liquid extractions, we add multiple volumes of solvent and then we separate them out. And knowing what I know about coffee, I was very skeptical. This whole idea of rebrewing coffee, I was confident it would not work.
Right.
But because I already had what I wanted, I was already ready to start a company. Well, Josh, I didn't even tell him what I was thinking. I just said, "You know what? We have the whole weekend to experiment. Let's do it." So we tried his idea, and I was expecting the result to be undrinkable. But what we got instead was a cup of coffee that was profound. The flavors were much deeper, as clean as the first cup was, because it was essentially a siphon brew. The new cup was even cleaner and much more. The flavor notes are almost crystalline in their definition. It was one of the best cups of coffee I'd ever had. And so at that point, we knew that we might be onto something. I wasn't sure if it was a fluke, so we brewed that way several times over that weekend. Each time we got the same result, and we started to think, well, maybe this could be the seeds of something big.
Wow. So without that, it might have not been what it is today.
There's no doubt that the multiple extractions of the same grounds is a fundamental breakthrough in coffee brewing science. We're able to achieve things that no other brewer or brewing method can do. It allows for a level of consistency and control over the final cup that is completely novel and has changed the businesses of our customers.
Absolutely. We were talking earlier before we started recording about the chasing of consistency. And I had mentioned that there was a couple of episodes of the show where we were talking about pour overs versus batch brew and how, all things being equal, if you're dialing in each one, the batch brew at its best is going to beat the pour over because of its consistency in terms of what you can offer your customers. And the fact that you can dial this thing in so tightly is fascinating, because that adds another layer of control to something that's already very consistent. What does the brewer do specifically? Like, how does it work? Because right now, I think, we were talking about multiple brew cycles. Talk to us about from the time you put the coffee grounds into the brewer to the time you get coffee, what happens?
So let me start off generally about our brewing philosophy, and then I'll get into the nitty-gritty about what's happening in the brewer. The way ground control works is we perform a series of mini brews, short timed brews on a given set of coffee grounds. And we then combine all of those mini brews together in the final beverage. So it's a blending process. And what's really important, and the thing that is very unique about our method, is in every mini brew, we use fresh water, and then we substantially dry the grounds, take out the brewed coffee from that mini brew and put it into a carafe, and then add fresh, unsaturated water. We're never reusing brewed coffee. It is the exact opposite of a percolator. Every mini brew uses fresh water. And unlike pulsing, which is, for lots of people, when they hear this, that's their most natural analogy, we're substantially drying the grounds. So we're actually getting a much fresher solvent that we're using on those grounds. And we're also cutting off the extraction every time. From a chemistry perspective, every time we take out the brewed coffee and add fresh water, for those coffee nerds out there, we're resetting the extraction curves from the very beginning. But the curves are lower because you can only extract what's still left in the coffee. So one of the really interesting quirks of coffee chemistry that we leverage is that when you're done brewing coffee, with almost any other method, there's still a lot of very desirable aromatic and flavor compounds that are left in the grounds. What happens is the more you try to extract those compounds, the more you end up also extracting the later extracting tannins, dry distillates, bad stuff. That's why if you over extract coffee, it tastes so bitter and undesirable. But what we're able to do is we're able to get more of the good stuff in the cup and leave out the bad stuff, because we're constantly restarting the extraction to the beginning, and we get a chance to extract more of those desirable compounds that otherwise wouldn't dissolve into the water, because that brew water is saturated with those compounds. So in terms of the process, you take a brew, standard looking brew basket. You put a paper filter into it. You add your grounds to the paper filter. Same exact workflow as a drip brewer. You put that basket in the brewer at the very bottom instead of the top. So we're kind of flipping brewing on its head in a very visually distinctive way. And then you hit the brew button. And at that point, the entire workflow is essentially identical to a drip brewer. But what happens under the hood is completely different. We're an immersion-based brewer. We do not use any kind of dripping whatsoever. And so what happens when you hit brew is water rushes into the brew basket. All the brew water for that the first mini brew is usually comes into the brew basket within the first 10 seconds of brewing. And then we have a small, what we call an agitator, a stirring wand, that creates a very even, very constant stirring in the brew basket that can be controlled at a very fine-grained level. What that does is it ensures immediate and very even contact between the brew water and the ground coffee. After the stirrer stops stirring the coffee water slurry sits there for a pre-programmed amount of time. You could set the volume of water using flow meters, so it's much more precise and consistent than a drip brewer. By the way, one thing that I find fascinating is people talk about the consistency of drip brewers, and what we've seen is that really it's not that drip brewers are consistent at all. They have massive variation in how much water they dose and what temperature that water is at. The issue is really that with pour over, there's such a tremendous inconsistency. Even if you do everything the same, the flow path of the water, the temperature, given ambient temperature, things like that, there's so much inconsistency that by comparison, drip seems to be consistent. But the fact is that if you take a drip brewer and you brew the same exact batch 10 times, you'll have 10 very different coffees, which is not the case with ground control because we use flow meters, because we dispense all the water at the same time. So the water is exactly at set point. You don't have to worry about changes in water temperature throughout the brewing process, things like that. So right now in the brewing process, you have the water, it's sitting in the ground in immersion for a pre-programmed amount of time. We're on the first mini brew. Then after the brewing time elapses, powerful vacuum pump turns on and it sucks out the brewed coffee through the bottom of the paper filter into the glass chamber. And the coffee grounds, which are now going to be substantially dried, remain in the paper filter in the brew basket. One thing that is important to clarify is that at no point in this process is the brewed coffee actually brewing under vacuum. So think of it as there's a giant straw at the bottom of the brew basket, and our vacuum pump is sucking on that straw to separate the brewed coffee from the grounds. That's what the vacuum pump does. It's used to move the brewed coffee from the brew basket to the glass dome. And what the glass dome does is it provides us a chamber that is under vacuum where we can store that coffee. Without the glass dome, there would be no place for the coffee to go under vacuum. It couldn't actually move. And that's why we have that chamber. So at this point, after the first mini brew, all of the brewed coffee has been moved from the brew basket to the glass dome. And at the end of that brew cycle, that coffee drops into the air pot. And then as that coffee is dropping into the air pot, new fresh water from the water tank is going into the same dried grounds we just brewed, and it's brewing them again. And that entire process repeats. And at the end of that second mini brew, the vacuum turns on. It separates the brewed coffee from the grounds. The coffee goes into the glass dome and then into that same air pot that had that first volume of coffee. So we're usually doing 2 or 3 mini brews on the same coffee grounds, and the results are combined together. It's that blending process that creates the final cup. And the way we think about it is just like a rainbow shot with espresso. If you taste each of those fractions of the coffee as it's brewing, you get a very similar experience to producing a rainbow shot. The first mini brew, the first cycle, produces coffee that is quite strong and that is very pronounced in sweetness and acidity. Those are the most early extracting compounds that come out first. The second extraction is responsible for what we think of as the flavor of coffee. It pulls out, that's where you're going to get, your tangerine notes, or you're going to start to get the differentiation between just sugar and brown caramel, or where you're going to start to really see those red fruit notes pop. That's going to come out in the second cycle. And then the third cycle is really responsible for that body and for that, what we like to call the tension of the coffee. So that experience of depth, the base notes that people really enjoy, especially in darker roasted cups of coffee. For lighter coffee, it's not uncommon for us to do 2 cycles and to really focus on the nuance and the subtlety of the cup.
Okay. Wow, there's a lot there. It's all super fascinating. First question I have is, I have 2. The first one is, you said that it's not being extracted via vacuum. Isn't that Like, how do you avoid the extraction process under vacuum? Because it sounds like an AeroPress in that it would sort of be part of the extraction process, that suction of water through the grounds.
Right. So let me clarify that statement. Many people, when they approach our brewer, they immediately hear the word vacuum and they believe that we're doing something similar to the Beacon Brewer, which is owned by Frankie.
Mm-hmm.
And what the Beacon Brewer does is it combines water with coffee in a vacuum chamber. So the coffee is brewing under vacuum, under low pressure conditions. And that fundamentally changes the extraction characteristics. You're lowering the boiling point and you're brewing the coffee, you're having it extract under low pressure. AeroPress and our brewer both are using pressure to move brewed coffee around. So we're forcing it through a filter, but that coffee is not actually brewing under any kind of pressure, or at least that's a much smaller piece of the brewing puzzle. Does the final vacuum do something to the coffee that is perceptible in the final cup? Probably. It's hard for us to know 100%, but we do know that we observe more lipids in the glass dome. There's a lot of crema that we actually see in our coffee, and that's also experienced in the cup. People have noted that our coffee has a much smoother texture, and we attribute that to the vacuum being able to extract more of the fats and lipids from the coffee into the final cup, because you're forcing that brewed coffee through a filter under higher pressure.
Right. So you're emulsifying some of the material.
Exactly.
Okay. So now you have these separate brew cycles, these mini brews, and you can alter the profile of each of them. Talk a little bit about the alteration of these profiles, because I would assume you're not going to want to have the same temperature of water for the second brew, because it's going to be hotter. The brew bed is going to be hotter than it was when it first started at room temperature. What kind of goes into that as far as the basic beginner's rules of adjusting those mini brews?
Absolutely. Our brewer does have temperature ramping, and it makes a profound impact on the cup. So we have the ability to step down or step up the brew temperature each cycle. We've only really used it for stepping down. We tried stepping up once, and it was not very tasty. But we give people the tools, and they can decide how to use it. The nice thing about ground control is it's not limited to coffee, so perhaps that step up would be interesting for someone brewing tea. We haven't experimented, but certainly we give people that power. But the stepping down definitely, it allows us to not only brew the coffee differently, but in many cases, we're able to extract even more of that flavor that comes out in the later cycles without pulling out the bitterness or the astringency or the undesirable flavors that are typically later extracting. So it gives us more time to extract the things we want. Now, temperature ramping, I would describe as a more advanced feature of our brewer. It's not something that we see all of our customers using. It's easy enough to dial in, but there's already so much control and power without changing the temperature between brew cycles, and while still getting a really amazing and consistent cup. So I'll tell you a story. We were talking about Sump Coffee, and I think they're really at the forefront of brewing science, brewing theory, brewing competition. Scott, the owner of Sump, has a series of videos, which we're now proud to be a part of, where he's gone through many of the most popular brewing methods in the world, whether it be AeroPress or French press or V60. And most of these brewing videos have about 200,000 or 300,000 views on YouTube. So he's someone who really takes his brewing very seriously. When I first installed the ground control at Sump, we brewed a cup, or a batch rather, and we were tasting it together. And he said, Eli, I'd like to see more brightness in this cup and a little more sweetness. I know this coffee has more sweetness to offer. And I told him, great, let's increase the first brew cycle by 1 second. And he looked at me and he said, "Don't you want to change it a little bit more than that?" I said, "Well, let's give it a try and see what happens." And so we did that. And instantly, the cup was not only exactly where he wanted it to be, but actually, my recollection was that that cup, in terms of the brightness and the sweetness, surpassed what he had experienced with previous cups of that coffee using other methods. And that's actually a hallmark of ground control, is that we can bring out more sweetness and more acidity if we want to, than any other brewing method because of this fine grain control. So Scott expressed uh, uh, quite a surprise at that small a change having such a strong impact. But the thing that's really interesting about ground control is that depending on which brew cycle you change the brew times on, it could have a very predictable and very significant impact on the cup. The first cycle is not, we're not just talking about adding a little bit more acidity in that first cycle with that 1 second. But what we're doing is we're completely shifting the extraction curves for the second and third extractions on the brewer. And so that actually has an exponential effect on what you ultimately extract out of the cup. And it's sensitive enough that small changes on that first cycle can be meaningfully experienced, but it is not so sensitive to the point that you lose control over the process. We've never had an issue between the first cycle and then the second and third cycle fine adjustments. We've never had an issue very quickly or effortlessly iterating towards the profile that our customers are looking for. So it's actually the ultimate tool for dialing in your cup. And I like to tell people that we can usually take a coffee and brew 3 or 4 different profiles of that same coffee that are eminently enjoyable and that are totally unrecognizable from each other, but they don't have any bitterness, excessive bitterness. They don't have any noticeable astringency, but we're exploring different facets of that coffee, and different incantations or iterations of that coffee that are not feasible with other brewing methods that rely on the natural extraction order of compounds. We're able to manipulate which compounds come out into the solution and which do not, and fundamentally change the way that coffee tastes as a result. So sometimes it makes roasters very uncomfortable. They think they know their coffee, and then we present them a cup of their coffee that is beautiful and delicious, but totally different than what they thought they were roasting. And some people love it because it shows them that there's a lot more to explore. It's almost like a psychedelic experience. You're suddenly exposed to the raw essence of your coffee bean and what it's possible of. So some people are really thrilled by that. But for some people, it can be very disorienting and alarming.
Trippy. You're meeting your coffee for the first time.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know you did that demonstration for me at Sump, where you just changed the variable of in Ethiopian. There was an Ethiopian natural, I think, or maybe it was a Kenya. I forget offhand, but it definitely, just by that 1 second change, made a huge difference in the cup. It was shocking to me to see that. Is this something, obviously, you would save these settings? These are profiles you could save in the machine to recreate in a later date?
Yes, it usually people who are interested in ground control are very pleasantly surprised to learn that you can save up to 40 profiles in our machine. Honestly, we could make it 1,000 profiles. We artificially limit it because we have nightmares of that customer who's going to save 1,000 profiles in the back end, and then they'll never be able to find what they're looking for. But it's all organized by coffee name. So you basically set the name of the bean, you create your profile, and in each of those profiles you can control the how many brew cycles, and for each brew cycle, what is the brew time, what is the brew volume, and what is the vacuum time. And so it ends up being incredibly consistent, a lot more consistent than a drip brewer or any other brewing method. Once that profile is locked in, our customers have shared with us that they're pretty much consistently getting exactly what they want every time.
So that leads to my next question, I guess, is that how you've been to so many trade shows, and This is one best equipment, right?
Best new product, commercial equipment from the Specialty Coffee Association. Absolutely.
Yeah, congrats. And what has been the response overall to people? Is it similar to what you've been describing with Scott at Sump? Is it pretty much mind-blowing to everybody?
There's nobody we've spoken with that cares about brewing and brewing theory and the quality of their coffee that hasn't been seriously impressed by what we offer. We've met with some of the largest specialty third wave coffee roasters in the U.S. And across the board, the reaction has been, this is different. This is impressive. This is a lot more impressive than what I was expecting. A lot of people come out with new brewing technologies and all kinds of bells and whistles, but very few have actually been able to come up with something that consistently produces a dramatically better cup. And that's been the feedback we've gotten across the board is, wow, you guys really invented something that at scale produces a cup that's much better than the best cup that we could produce beforehand. Now, with that, we'll also say that, there are people who have not purchased ground controls. And usually it has to do with strategically what the cafe is focused on. We've priced ground control at a level where it's basically the price of two EK43s or half of a 3-group espresso machine. So it's affordable, but it is at a premium to a standard drip brewer. There's more happening under the hood, and we build by hand here in the U.S. So that does lead to a higher price point. But the nice thing is for our customers, and we have customers all the way from people like Scott who are at the forefront of brewing science, all the way to local cafes in places that are fairly remote, and all of them are really happy with their investment. I can say very proudly that our customers are thrilled with their investment in ground control and the results it produces in their cafe.
So when you look at the landscape of brewing and the coffee industry right now, and your contribution to it, what do you see being the most important thing for people to focus on going forward? Because we are trying to create an experience for customers that will get them to pay more for coffee and to be loyal to our shops. And as we talk about all different levels of the supply chain needing to be re-examined for sustainability, the shop is also one of those links in the chain, and the consistency of our quality and how we go about approaching what we offer our customers is critical. So from what you've seen through your venture into coffee till now, going to all these trade shows and seeing how this impacts the industry, how do you see things shaping up in the coming years in specialty coffee, and what is it that you want the ground control to be able to contribute to that?
First, let me hit on the sustainability piece because it's something we think about a lot, and it's not obvious how to tackle that in brewing. The average cafe dumps about 10 gallons of batch brewed coffee a day. I was just talking to a cafe yesterday where, it's very important to them to offer the highest quality coffee, and they found that with their batch brewed coffee, they can hold it for at most 30 minutes, and then they have to dump it. Otherwise, that coffee does not meet their quality standards. So with ground control, we change that equation two ways. One is our coffee, for whatever reason, because of our different brewing technique, and I can't say that I understand the scientific underpinnings of it yet, something that we're investigating currently, but for whatever reason, our customers have consistently found that they can store our coffee for longer periods without it going bad. Now, it will lose some aromatics. Any hot beverage stored in a vessel, there will be aromatics that evaporate over that time period, but it does not become unpleasantly bitter or undrinkable for the vast majority of coffees that are brewed on it. Also, with drip brewers today, what we see is that most drip brewers have a very limited range of batch sizes. You can do a full batch or a half batch. And for 1 gallon drip brewer, that means that you're brewing 1 gallon brews during your busy periods and 2 liter brews during your less busy periods. That is an artifact of the fact that drip brewers do not use flow meters, and they rely on gravity flow, so they're limited in their accuracy in terms of what they can dose, and also they're limited in their control systems. They're very primitive controls in drip brewers, so setting up more specific profiles is just not possible with the hardware that's presented. With our brewer, we have customers who do anywhere from 900 milliliter batches all the way up to a gallon. So during slow periods, you could just brew as little as 2.5, 3 cups. And if you do have to dump, you're dumping typically 1 cup or less of coffee during slow periods rather than a whole liter and a half. So that's something that has been a tremendous benefit to our customers. So I wanted to highlight that.
Nice.
But that really is that's really just a small part of the problem that ground control was designed to solve, which is the sustainability of the cafe industry in America. So over the past 25 years, we've seen an average growth in the number of specialty cafes of over 13% a year. There's now over 30,000 specialty cafes in the U.S. So we're talking about, if you're in an urban area like here in San Francisco, it is not uncommon to see 2 or 3 cafes on a single block. That's really made the business of operating a cafe extremely risky. It's very cutthroat, and we've seen a lot of young cafes struggling to survive or even closing. There's a huge asymmetry in terms of operational knowledge in cafes. We have some operators who have hundreds of cafes, and they have entire teams whose only job it is to create spreadsheets to create economic efficiencies. And then you have small operators who are very passionate about coffee, and that's really what they bring to the table. But not all of them are able to compete in an environment where their competitors have already predicted the small cafe's next move, and they're already working to shut those cafes down or buy them out. So that's really where we started focusing on batch brewed coffee. Batch brewed coffee is the largest volume item in American cafes. It's nearly 40%. It's in nearly 40% of transactions. And it represents a tremendous opportunity for these cafes that are struggling to increase their revenue, or even cafes that are successful that want to increase their revenues further. There's a much bigger pie out there for these cafes than what they're accessing. Customers are willing to pay a premium for a high quality product. So with the same customers that you have every day, you can increase your revenues. And if you're a struggling cafe, you can change that equation if you're really thinking about your product and your offering. And so what's really interesting is there hasn't been a single new batch brewing method to come to market since automated drip was invented by Vigomat in 1954. So it's almost 70 years where you have basically the beating heart of most cafe businesses in America that hasn't been touched, and nobody's thought about how to leverage that to grow the revenue of cafes. What's happened in the cafe since 1954 is actually really interesting too, and this is what you led with, Chris. Cafes are not just a place for people to get caffeinated anymore. What they've discovered is cafes are in the experience business. People go to cafes because they're looking for that special experience, that place where they can go to and do their work or meet their friends and have their peaceful Sunday morning with their family. They're not looking to just get caffeinated. But when you think about the batch brewer of today, the drip brewer, it is not contributing in any meaningful way to that experience. It's just producing a cup of coffee that is consistent, but it's producing a cup of coffee that has absolutely no educational component. It doesn't teach people about the origin. It doesn't teach people anything about saving coffee or being respectful of the tremendous efforts, the miracle that happens every year when farmers are able to grow coffee and bring it to us so we can enjoy it. And it doesn't highlight that best cup of coffee that is possible, because we know from cupping a coffee that coffee has so much more to give than what is typically possible out of a drip brewer. So that's where ground control comes in. The beauty, theater, and flavor of our brewer is unprecedented, and that's really the feedback we've consistently gotten not only from our customers, but from their customers as well. We have people reach out to us over our website from all over the country who tell us, we tried your brewer at Sump, we tried your brewer at Dandelion, we tried your brewer at Ironclad, we were at Equator Coffee, and when we saw your brewer, we never heard of it, and it blew our minds. So this is something that is really changing the experience that customers are having at the cafe. And that's why we won the Best New Product Award as well from SCA. When they gave us the award, they shared with us that we won because we consistently brewed the best coffee at the show without qualifications. That is quite a distinction, and that's really important. The coffee business, people think that the coffee business is about marketing. The coffee business is really about quality. We've enabled cafes across the U.S. to consistently produce coffee whose quality vastly exceeds what was previously their best cup. It's noticeable both by the shop owners and by people who know almost absolutely nothing about coffee. We've had blind tastings with people who describe themselves as having absolutely no palate whatsoever, and they can instantly tell the meaningful reduction in bitterness and the increase in sweetness in the cup of ground control. And you see it in our Instagram, in our testimonials, by following our customers on social media. They're pretty much thrilled with their purchase and what it's done for their business. And what we're very proud of is what it does for our customers' bottom line. Our customers are finding that they can charge 30 cents or more per cup of their batch brew. So instead of charging $2 or $2.50 for a cup of batch, they're charging $2.30 or $2.80. And if you're doing 200 cups a day, which is a pretty typical volume for batch at a reasonably busy cafe, that's actually more than $20,000 a year in additional revenue without changing the coffee beans themselves, without really changing your operations at all. All you're doing is you're taking out your drip brewer and you're installing a ground control.
Your equipment is enabling people to make a distinction for themselves in an area where there is sometimes thought to be no distinction left to make for yourself. You need to increase your quality, but everybody's doing that. And by offering something that has expanded your ability to explore your coffee, you're allowing this new level of quality to exist in the just average cafe, which is huge. So I really applaud you and your partners and the efforts you're making with this equipment. And I really thank you for joining me on the show today to talk about this, because it is about optimizing the experience for the customer and also for the owners of these shops and people working in and operating them. There's a lot of pride that goes into it. And there's a lot of burnout too when you don't see what you want to see from your coffee or the customer experience. So the more that we can optimize these little differences and these big differences in our quality, the better. So how can we keep up to date with what's going on with ground control, learn a little bit more about the product? How can we stay in touch?
Absolutely. Well, our website is Voga Coffee, VOGACOFFEE.com. That's the name of our company. Our product is ground control, and Cyclops is the model of ground control that won Best New Product. It's called Cyclops because it's a single group brewer. And also you can follow us on Instagram. It's at ground, GROUND, control, CONTRL, no final O.
Okay, great. We'll link to those in the show notes as well. And Eli, again, thank you. This was really fascinating. I learned a ton, and I'm really grateful for your contribution to how we brew in our cafes.
Thank you, Chris. We really appreciate your time, and we're looking forward to continuing the conversation with you and your listeners. We're really excited to share our new and exciting technology, and we really are just very grateful for everyone who has an opportunity to try the cup and share their experience with their coffee friends.
Well, that was definitely a fascinating conversation, and it's so great to see companies like Ground Control taking on the challenge of creating true innovation in brewing technology. And which one of us doesn't want to absolutely get the most out of every coffee we put through our batch brewer? Batch brewing for so long has been one of those things that we just think of as the sort of middle-of-the-road option. And it doesn't have to be. And I love that this brewer is both visually appealing as well as the ability to control and extract the maximum amount from your coffee in a repeatable and consistent way. So if you want to know more about this, you can go to the website vogacoffee.com. We got links in the show notes also to their Instagram account. Eli has also put together a map, international map of where you can find ground control brewers if you want to experience the coffee yourself. There's various places where you can go into the cafes that have the brewer and test out the coffee. Buy coffee from these cafes. See it in action for yourselves. If you want to reach out to me, you can do so by emailing chris@keystotheshop.com. I would encourage you to go to the Keys to the Shop website and check out the consulting page on the website to find out more about what I can offer you in way of training and consulting for your business. If you have a problem that needs to be solved, if you want to elevate your operations or the quality of your coffee in your shop, I am here to help you in any way that I can. We can schedule a free 20-minute phone call to explore what exactly I can do to help you. Again, that's chris@keystotheshop.com, and I look forward to hearing from you. So that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. I hope you have an amazing week and you get an opportunity to taste the coffee off of the Ground Control Brewer sometime soon. And I also hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.